All right, so we will get this going. So similar to last time, this is being recorded. So if you need to pop off for a meeting or can't make the whole session, we will email it to you after. So keep an eye on that. As we're going through, just feel free to submit any follow-up questions in the chat. I know previously we had wanted to use the Q&A function, but for whatever reason, that's not working on my Zoom. So apologies there. Feel free to drop them in the chat and I will be keeping an eye on that as we go through. And like I said, we will share the video with everyone after, so you can share it with friends who might have questions or rewatch it for fun if that's what you want to do. Awesome. So like I said, we have Patrick here. Hi, Patrick.
Hello.
Patrick is the co-founder and CEO of UX Writers Collective and a former lead digital copywriter at MYOB in Australia, and also the host of Writers of Silicon Valley podcast. And I don't know if everyone saw a new episode came out yesterday, or Patrick talked to a UX writer at Figma, which was a really great conversation. So highly recommend checking that out. And Patrick will be answering all of your burning questions today. So really excited to jump in. And just to give everyone a quick look at what we'll be covering. So today we'll be chatting through how do you stand out as a candidate, what your role will be as a UX writer. And so kind of breaking down the day-to-day, working with design teams and tricky stakeholders, freelancing, internships, and some new UX Writers Collective updates. So with that, we will kick things off. And if you're just tuning in, let us know where you're tuning in from in the chat. And if there's anything that's confusing or if you have more questions as we go along, drop it there as well. And I will be monitoring. Cool. Patrick, you ready?
I'm ready. Let's do this.
Cool. Awesome. So first section, standing out as a candidate. So when you think about your most successful hires, what do you believe catapulted their success? What are their most important skills?
Yeah, so this is a great question to start. So when I think back about the people who I've hired or who I've worked with who have done very well, there are a few skills that stand out. Now, obviously, that they all have great skills when it comes to using language and words, and so they understand that very, very well, and so that's kind of a given. When it comes to the other skills that really help them stand out, they have a design sensibility, so they understand design thinking, so they understand that process and they're really familiar with it and comfortable with it, and they're really comfortable with iterating on a design or a process, and they're not really attached to one particular idea. They're really open to just making the best idea possible. They have an emphasis on process and really demonstrating their rationale for why they choose something. So they don't just say, we should do this because I think it's the best way to do it. They can really demonstrate why is this best for the user. Influencing without authority is a really big one. So as a designer, you're part of a team. And so you need to be able to convince people why you should do something. And so building an argument, being able to influence people without necessarily having the authority to say to them, go and do this. You need to be able to convince them that your idea is the best. An emphasis on observation and thinking in hypotheses. So when I say an emphasis on observation, one of the things that can really trip up a designer is that in user testing or when watching people use a particular design, sometimes you can tend to look at something and then think, oh, the users are doing this, therefore we can conclude this about the design. The best designers and writers that I've seen don't take that approach. What they say is, okay, we've observed this, therefore we have a hypothesis that, so let's try something and see if that hypothesis is right. They're not really dogmatic about a particular idea. They're more willing to test things out, more like a scientific method. They can analyze and understand data very well. They understand the limitations of data. Of course, attention to detail. And finally, resourcefulness. So are they able to go into Figma and create a wireframe? Are they able to go into InVision and create a prototype? If I ask them, can you please run this user testing session because the chief tester is sick today, can they do that? Do they have the skills to do that? So those are just some of the skills that really sort of set some of those candidates apart.
Awesome. So getting on to interviewing. So what does that interview actually look like? How can you prepare for it? And then how do you demonstrate your process to hiring managers?
Yeah, so obviously every interview is different, and so different organizations have different processes, and so it will vary from company to company, organization to organization. That being said, there is a typical type of process. So the first part is that you'll typically have a call with the recruiter, the person who is at the front line looking at the various portfolios and resumes. They will look at your portfolio usually. Usually you're asked to submit a portfolio, and then they will ask you some basic questions about it. So they'll ask you to take you through some of your projects, some of the results, and just give an overview of your history. And that's basically just to make sure that number one, you are who you say you are, but also you have the confidence to really talk through your work. Sometimes that call will be followed up by a call with someone on the team. Sometimes you'll skip the recruiter and just go to the team, but usually you'll speak to the recruiter. The next stage is usually some form of design challenge. So they'll give you, now that's not a hard and fast rule. There are some places that will not give you a design challenge, but a lot will. So they'll give you a design challenge to do. And the idea there is basically not necessarily to see what you come up with, although that's really important. It's to see how you work, like what's your process. And so that's really an important part of that process. And then in a lot of organizations, they'll ask you to come back and present that design challenge, or at least talk about it with either the person who's hiring you or the team. In some of the larger tech organizations, like Google and Netflix and so on, it's typical to present that to a number of different people. So you might have like 5 or 6 different people in a room, or on Zoom, as it were, and you'll present your findings. And the idea there is to see how confident you are in basically showing your work and your results and what you came up with. And then often that's followed up by individual interviews that are really asking details about that design challenge. In terms of demonstrating your process, we mentioned this last time, but the hard and fast rule that I always go back to is follow that UX double diamond approach. So start with your problem, go outwards and research it, refine that problem into a more specific problem statement, expand and iterate with a number of different solutions. So sketch and ideate and do all that sort of fun stuff, prototype it, and then put something live and then monitor the results. So it's the problem, process, solutions, and results. If you look up the double diamond approach, that'll be a great way to get started.
Awesome. And just a quick follow-up question in the chat. So the design challenge itself, is that usually something that you're taking home to do on your own time? Or is that something that you're expected to do in person during the interview?
Really depends. So a lot of them are something that you'll be expected to do in your own time. Now, obviously, there's a lot of discussion about in the industry about whether that's actually right or not, because obviously some people have more time than others. Unfortunately, it is a reality of the industry, so it's probably just something to prepare for. However, there are a lot of organizations that will have you do something in an interview. So they'll give you like a half-hour challenge, and you'll have to do it in that process. I just want to follow up on another question that's just come through, where they're asking about if you're missing data experience. And so what is data for UX writing? When I refer to data, what I'm talking about are the types of data that you would typically look at when it comes to your deliverables. So for example, if you're working on a particular project and you need to understand if you're increasing monthly active users, you need to be able to understand how that data works, how to analyze it, and so on. Analytics, particularly on, web analytics, that type of stuff is good, really good and really useful to understand. But also there are two types of data. So there's quantitative data, but there's also qualitative data. So user testing data is what we would call qualitative data. And so being able to reference that type of data and use it and speak about it is, a really great, even critical skill to have as a UX writer or content designer. So that's what I'm talking about when I talk about data. And if you're missing that experience, what I would say is try and take part in some user testing, because then you can try and do some synthesis of user testing data that can give you some of that experience there.
Great. Awesome. Keep your questions coming in the chat and we will get to them as we go along. So this is a good question. Is it even possible to get an entry-level UX writing position?
Yeah, so I suspect the person who's asked this is maybe a little bit frustrated with the process of finding a job, but absolutely, there are plenty of entry-level UX writing positions out there. If you search on LinkedIn, you'll find a lot of them, actually. They may not necessarily be in the city you're located in, but thankfully with a lot of remote working options now, it's better than ever to find something entry level. So one thing I would say though is in a lot of entry level positions, what these job ads will say is they might say, up to 2 years of experience. And so sometimes that really can turn people off because they think, okay, well, I don't really have 1 or 2 years of experience. What I would say is just apply anyway. So just apply anyway. It doesn't really matter. But demonstrate what you've done on your own in order to show that you can actually do the job. So look through the job ad, look at what they're asking you to do, and then demonstrate in your portfolio the skills that they're looking for. So if they're looking for someone who's written for UI components, show writing that you have created for tooltips, error messages, push notifications. If you haven't done that in paid work, do something like the Daily UX Writing Challenge and start mocking up designs on your own. Leverage your existing experience. So if you're a copywriter, if you're a journalist, if you're in any type of creative field, try and find the skills that you can leverage in order to get into that position. So for example, have you conducted a content audit? Have you completed any type of writing that focuses on any type of writing that is audience focused? So talk about how you chose the words you did, talk about your process, and show that you really think carefully about how you choose the words you do and your overall process. Again, the skills are all the same. So design thinking, explaining your rationale, you will have done those in whatever job you were doing beforehand, especially in a creative field. Show how you've been able to do that in order to get into that position. But yes, there are absolutely entry-level jobs available. There is a follow-up question, if applying for an entry-level position, is the interview process as detailed? It typically will be, but what will often happen is that the questions will be less intense. So if you're interviewing for a mid-level / senior position, the type of questions you can expect will be things like, how did you impact organizational level change? Tell me about a time when you had to tell, an executive that they were wrong. Tell me about a time when, a testing process made you think differently about a particular design. You probably won't get those types of intense questions for an entry-level position. you're more likely to get things around like, tell me about your process, tell me about your rationale, like why did you choose these words and not these words, those types of questions.
Awesome. And Patrick, there's one more follow-up question about someone who might have light writing experience but heavy UX experience, and how that candidate would be considered. Would that be considered entry level since you're kind of new to writing, but you have the heavy design experience?
So that's a great question. What I would say is that it definitely gives you an advantage in that you come in with those UX skills. What I would say is you then need to demonstrate a number of different examples in order to get into that position. So, for example, I would really recommend, you've got that UX advantage, so really put that in your corner. So demonstrate how your research led you to change different wording in whatever design you're in. So you were able to show how your existing experience led you to become a better UX writer. So really tie those two together. Use those examples you've already got and then tie them into the words and content design choices that you've made. So that's a really great question. Another great question we've got here, we've got a lot coming through. I just want to answer this one quickly. If someone has a few UX writing examples for the portfolio, but is working on new projects, would you recommend against representing those projects with a placeholder and informing project in progress? I wouldn't do that personally. If I'm a hiring manager and I'm looking at something that just says like project in progress, it doesn't really add anything to my understanding. Feel free to mention it when talking to them. You can just say, oh, I'm also working on this and this and this. So you can let them know that, yeah, there's stuff in the pipeline, but it won't really affect my decision just to see something that says project in progress. So I wouldn't, it's not going to hurt you, but I just wouldn't bother doing it.
Good questions. Cool. So we're going to move on to the next section, your role as UX writer. And we will have time once we get through all of these at the end to answer more questions. So if we miss your question, we will definitely come back to it. So this first one, what are the everyday tasks of a UX writer and what can you kind of expect in your day-to-day?
Yeah, so it's interesting because as a UX writer, most of your day will actually not be spent writing. It's kind of like most jobs, right? Like the key function of your role is actually something that you do a minority of the time, and the rest of the time is spent doing a lot of other activities that sort of surround it. So yeah, you will be writing for UI components and writing in designs, but you'll also be, as a part of the UX team, you'll be doing things like sketching, wireframing, taking part in critique, conducting user research and synthesis and observing what people say and feel about the words and the content design and how you can take their advice and their observations and really impact your design. You'll be presenting to stakeholders. You'll be meeting to scope work. If you're part of creating a design system, you'll be working with people internally to figure out what they need, the types of tools they rely on. You'll be working alongside developers when they're actually implementing a design. Can't tell you how many times I've sat down next to a developer and have had to talk about like what goes where and, why we're choosing this particular string versus another string, and, taking part in audits and strategic planning work. So there's a lot of really big picture thinking that you're involved in as a UX writer. So as you can see, it's not just like sitting down and just writing for components. It's a lot of other strategic activity that you need to think about carefully when doing this type of work.
Awesome. So this, I feel like a lot of people can relate to. So what if you are the first and only UX writer within your organization?
Yeah, so this is an experience a lot of people have because they're at an organization where they don't have a team of 100 content strategists across multiple countries. They're coming in as the first person. If anyone attended the Button conference last year, Vicky Ciolas from Kickstarter did a really great talk on how to make impact as a team of one. So if you have the digital pass to that conference, which is still available, I'd really encourage you to check that out. She's a great resource and fantastic. Gave a fantastic talk on that. The first thing you need to do is you need to figure out how to prioritize your work. So where you're likely looking at everything and going, oh my goodness, there's so much to do. What do I do? Where do I start? You need to figure out a way to prioritize what needs to get done. And that will be entirely dependent on your own company and your own organization and what people believe is the most important. Find the biggest impact you can make. And that doesn't necessarily mean a huge project. It means what can you do quickly that will have a big impact? Because if you come in as a team of one and you can start making effective, positive changes straight away, the more people will see your role as useful, and they'll begin to really respect what you're doing. So find quick wins, so to speak. And again, that may not be the biggest projects. It may be a bunch of small but high impact projects straight away. So for instance, if you come in and you notice that actually there's a bunch of inconsistencies that you can clean up very quickly within a couple of weeks, be sure to do that straight away. And then scale your work. Really make sure that you find ways to scale the process. So is there a way you can automate incoming requests for UX copy? Is there a form that you can create? If you're working in Jira, can you create a process by which people can send requests to you? Figure out ways to really scale it, so that for two reasons. Number one, it's really going to help you in terms of organizing your work. But also, secondly, you will then be able to quantify how much assistance you need to give. And so that will help you, because you can go to the person who's in charge of hiring and you can say, look, I've received 100 requests in 2 weeks. We should really hire someone else to really get through all this work. So those are just some of the ways you can start out if you're a team of one. But yeah, just try and make some quick impacts as much as possible.
Good stuff. Cool. So thinking about, you're starting as a UX writer and you feel like you're competent in your role. How do you then kind of take things to the next level and move from a junior to a more senior role?
Yeah. So, we've been, we'll have a lot more to say about this, through the year, because it's a really interesting topic and, receive a lot of questions about it. And for a lot of UX writers and content designers, it's a barrier for them, because they sort of get to a mid-level position or a junior position. They think, okay, well, I want to become, director level. What do I do? How do I get there? And because it's really not just about like how well you write, and it's really not just about the words you choose, or whether you create some clever micro copy like in Slack or something. It's really, there are other aspects that go into whether you are going to become a senior leader. And so here are a few of those things. The first is really think about the bigger picture. Think strategically. Don't just think about, okay, I received this request to write this copy for this error notification. Really dig into, like, why does this error notification exist? What's the flow? What's the process here? Why is this being created? What could we do? What else could we do to make sure that the user doesn't end up here? Is this really a UX writing solution? Can't tell you how many times I've met with people and they've said, oh, we need copy for this. And I say, well, do we really need copy here? Or is there another solution that we can create to avoid this problem in the first place? So really think, big picture about that. Track your results and impact. How are you making an impact? I have heard stories of UX writers who have been, unfortunately, laid off or moved to different teams because they were not able to show the results of what they've done. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that you show that, okay, the copy had a 10% increase in revenue. But what it can say is you are able to track across a UX process what impact you had. So for instance, you created some wording in a prototype that goes to user testing. You then observe that 3 out of 5 testers had a negative response to that language or were confused by it. You then chose it, and then you implemented it in the design, and that design resulted in a X percentage increase in monthly active users. You're then tracking how your writing has impacted the user experience. So really measure that, follow it, and be able to demonstrate that when people ask for it. Identify opportunities for company or organizational level change. So I mentioned before, If you're looking for a mid or senior level position, companies will ask about that. So are you working at moving content into design systems? Are you implementing perhaps a process to, um, uh, as I mentioned before, to receive UX writing requests? Are you building scale in your type of work? Influence and implement projects beyond your role. So get attached to projects that aren't necessarily within your immediate scope of work. Think about where you can influence projects and really look for them. And I think this is one of the biggest things when you're early in your career, you tend to sort of wait for a manager to sort of give you a project. You tend to think, okay, well, if I'm good, they're going to notice me, and then they're going to give me something to do. Don't think that way. If you have an idea, just go do it. Just start doing it. Now, obviously, you need to follow you don't need to uh, overstep your boundary or start, doing someone else's job for them. But if you have an idea, don't stop yourself from going to someone and saying, hey, I've really got this idea. What do you think? Like, do you think we could do this together? That's really the mindset you should be having. Really try and go do something on your own, and don't wait for someone to just give you permission to do it.
Great answer. Cool. So when thinking about, your role as a UX writer, are there any new tools or techniques or things that we should know about in 2021?
Yeah, so I think with the rise of Figma has come also the rise of these types of copy management systems. So the big three are Ditto, Strings, and Frontitude. I'd say those are kind of the coolest tools right now that people are using, and the most useful, really. So I would say they're great to get your head around. So I'd go and have a play with those. The rise of Figma has really made it more accessible for UX writers to be involved in design. So what I would say is, like, there's kind of really no excuse to not be able to go into design software now and mess around. And if you use Figma, then you'll be able to use Sketch as well. So I would say just go to Figma, sign up for a profile. It's free, and just mess around. You don't have to be great at it. You just have to, like, be able to, even if you can edit text in Figma, I mean, that's like a great start. So, that's there's really no excuse there. Prototyping is really easy in Figma. So if you can have, again, I go back to resourcefulness, what I mentioned earlier. If you can go into Figma and you can create a prototype, that's going to be really great for your job prospect. So go and have a look there. And then looking forward, this isn't something that people can sort of practically use now, but GPT-3 is an AI technology that is now allowing people to use AI to write entire, huge blocks of text. So something to keep in the back of your mind is, like, how is AI going to impact the UX writing process? Is it that we'll be able to give AI a set of instructions for an error message, and the AI will spit out, 15 different options, and we can take something from it? Just something to keep in the back of your mind and start doing some research about. But that's probably because I feel it's going to have a big impact on writing in the next few years. So yeah, just something to think about.
Good stuff. If you guys have any other tools or techniques that you want to drop in the chat and share, I'm sure everyone else would appreciate that. And I saw someone said that CX writing, so writing across the entire customer experience and journey, is a helpful technique. 100% agree. And we also have a quick question, Patrick, just on the ratio of UX writer to designer developers. Like, what does that usually look like?
Really depends. So if you're in if you're a team of one, it can, be one UX writer. I've heard stories of, like, upwards of 50, 60, 70 designers. So it can be, like, really crazy, which is why you need to be able to scale your work effectively. At a larger organization, it could be as little as, 1 to 5 or 1 to 4. I personally have worked in a team where it's been about that. So that's a much more manageable number. I've never really heard of 1-to-1. So if you've heard of one of those, like, let me know. But yeah, there's a really big range in terms of the ratios, depending on the size of the organization.
Awesome. All right, everyone, we're now switching gears to working with design teams. So if you have any other questions related to this, drop it in the chat and we will get to them after. So how can I communicate to my team what a UX writer actually does? What if they think I'm a copywriter?
Yeah, so unfortunately, this is a little bit of a common problem. The first thing, I actually want to address my last point here first, which is to say, you really need buy-in from leadership. So the person who has hired you or the organization that has hired you has clearly demonstrated or said that they need a UX writer. They think they need this role. So you need a leader in that team to be able to say, we have a UX writer and they need to set the expectations for what you're being involved in. That being said, it's not all on them, it's on you. So you need to be able to show, okay, what results can you show? How can you demonstrate impact? How is it different what is different by virtue of the fact that you are there, and be able to demonstrate that? Showing before and after examples are a really great way of showing that. So you could say, hey, I've got this design and here's my process and here's what I've come up with and here's what I think we can do afterwards. Which goes to my third point, which is you need to demonstrate how you contribute to that design process. Don't just focus on editing the words. Focus on the entire design process. That will really help you, because if they think you're a copywriter, they're not going to necessarily expect that you have knowledge about the design process. But if you can demonstrate that you can sketch, you can wireframe, you can take part in user testing, you can observe, and then you can iterate your designs based on the feedback you took during that process, that's going to be really, really important. So be able to demonstrate that. And again, I would just make leadership your ally and really help them see that they need to set the expectation that you need to be in sketching sessions, you need to be in user testing, and really try and make your way into those meetings and that process. It can be difficult. I'm not underestimating that. It can be difficult, but those are some of the techniques I would use.
Awesome. And so kind of a similar question, but so if there are UI designers who are working on copy, how do you engage them to kind of, weigh in on those processes?
Yeah, so I've experienced this before where you're working with a designer and they've sort of gone like, oh yeah, I wrote this copy, I think it's pretty good. And then you look at it and no, it's actually not pretty good. You need to change it. So, the first thing I would say is like talk to them and strike up a friendship. Like really become friends with them, because the way that they're going to respect your suggestions and what you're telling them is if they feel like you respect them. So really build up that rapport. And I don't want to use the term soft skills because I think that is a misnomer, but really spend time understanding them. What are their goals? What are they trying to do? What I would say is have a really heavy emphasis on rationale. So if they're showing you a design and they're showing you the copy they wrote, just ask them like, hey, I'm interested, like what led you to choose that particular wording? And really go deep on them. It's like, is there anything in the data that helped you, that made you think about this type of wording? Like what led you to really choose that? And then if they can't give it, I would then present yours. So I would present your rationale. Do you have any data from user testing? Do you have any quantitative data? Be able to show that, and so you can demonstrate to the designer, hey, well, here's my, thank you for showing me your copy. Here's the data I have that I think would that has led to my suggestions, and then show them that, and then provide them with your suggestions, and then do like a before and after as well. Now, if they don't listen to that, you've obviously got a little bit of a different problem, because then they're sort of ignoring the data. They're ignoring the user research. They're ignoring the rationale. But if you're able to then show your process, that's going to go a long way into helping you show that, actually there are some suggestions here that are going to result in a better user experience. And hopefully they'll begin to understand that actually they don't need to write copy themselves. they can rely on you. But again, just go back to the data, go back to the process, emphasize how it is that you got to your conclusions.
Awesome. Yeah, let the data kind of speak for itself. Love
That's
that.
right.
Cool. So when thinking about acquiring design legitimacy, if you're working with other designers, how do you kind of make sure that you're a part of those conversations and taken seriously as a UX writer as well?
Yeah, so I've kind of answered this through the process, but just to reiterate quickly, really understand design concepts and processes. The double diamond approach. It's critical as a UX writer. It's just the mandatory part of doing the job. So make sure you are a part of the process through the entire way. So including user testing. Make sure that you're involved. Think about structure. So don't just think about the words. Think about what we call content design, which is like, how is content presented? How is it laid out in a particular flow? Be able to work in design software like Figma and Sketch. Can't tell you how much that will help you, because you won't just be relying on designers to update text. If you can go in there and do it yourself, that's a huge win. And again, just have rationale for everything you do. The more you can demonstrate that you have a backing behind what you're doing, that's really going to help you.
Great. This is a good question. I mean, so how do you answer when a designer asks the difference between copywriting and UX writing? Like, would you say that data and testing is a big difference, or?
No, I would say that a copywriter is someone who is selling a message. A UX writer is someone who works within a design team to improve the user experience. So I don't think you can be a UX writer outside of a design team.
Great. Awesome. So we are going to move on to freelancing and internships. So do you think we can have a decent career as freelance UX writers? How should you quote for services?
Yeah, so I think you can have a good career as a freelance UX writer. One thing I would say is that you need to not just rely on smaller jobs, but you need to look at some lengthier contracts as well. So there are plenty of contracts around for sort of like 3 or 6 months. So you need to think about that. You need to really think about how much you charge. So check out our salary survey at UX Writers Collective. That's your benchmark. Don't undersell yourself. If you're a freelancer, you're going to need to pay for not only your self-employment taxes if you're in the United States, you're going to need to be paying for health insurance and so on. So really think long and hard about how much you're charging. I really wouldn't undersell yourself. You need to create a brand and really market for yourself. If you're a freelancer, you're essentially a small business with with a team of one. So you really need to think about that. Demonstrate the impact you can have when it comes to hiring a freelancer. Companies need to know that they're getting return on investment. So be ready to show that. Look at online marketplaces like Fiverr. And I would, look at those and really think about how can you set yourself apart. So there is work for freelance UX writers, absolutely. But you'll need to work hard at marketing yourself.
Great. And so when thinking about whether it's freelance or for a full-time position, how would you go about pitching companies who don't have a UX writer role? Ooh, Patrick, I think we lost you. Can you hear me?
Oh, I'm back. Sorry.
Hello.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, it's okay.
There we go. Sorry about that.
Oh my gosh, no worries, no worries.
Yes. So tips on pitching to companies that don't have a UX writing role. So this is unusual, but it can happen. So what I would say is if you're approaching a company and they don't have a UX writing role and you want to be their UX writer, think about this from the perspective of the company. Why are they spending money on you? So if they're going to pay you a salary of potentially 6 figures to hire a UX writer, you need to be able to demonstrate, okay, how are they going to get that money back? And it can't just be because, you're creating a voice and tone document for them. It has to be about what can you demonstrate and what can you improve. go armed with a list of potential updates. So is there anything in their experience that you've noticed that could be leading to a negative experience for users? Go into with a pitch deck basically that is basically says, I've noticed these issues. I think could be having these problems. Here's some potential solutions, and here's why I have the experience in order to do this. So again, just go on with the portfolio of experience and demonstrate why. But don't just go in assuming that they're going to pick you because you can make their wording consistent and so on. I mean, it's great if you can demonstrate why that's going to be a benefit, but think return on investment.
Definitely. So when thinking about unpaid internships, should you take one?
Look, what I would say is that typically, I believe that you should be paid for the work that you do. So, unpaid internships, they are, they're obviously controversial because there are people who are in a position to take an unpaid internship who are then able to get a job. And there are many talented people who are not in a position to take an unpaid internship. And that can lead to some pretty awful inequalities in our industry. Typically what I would say is I wouldn't recommend taking an unpaid internship. There are paid internships available. I would prioritize those. If you do want to take an unpaid internship and you feel there's no alternative and you feel like there's an opportunity that you really can't give up, what I would say is, if you do take one, be very clear about what you're going to get out of it. And I would really ask the people offering that unpaid internship, what am I going to leave with? Like, what am I going to have at the end of it? And there's a really great point in the chat just now. Not sure how an unpaid internship is different from a volunteer opportunity to boost your portfolio. I agree. I would really say that if you're going to consider taking an unpaid internship, there are alternatives that you can look at, like doing a volunteer work for an organization to boost your portfolio. Perhaps if there's a not-for-profit that you can work for, that you can volunteer for, that's going to provide you with something to put in your portfolio, I would really recommend doing something like that. And looking for paid internships over an unpaid internship. And another great point, there's a link in the chat now to regulations on unpaid internships. Be clear about your what you're covered by and your rights under the law. Look, really typically I would not recommend it. Try and find ways to boost your portfolio. Is there a way that you can get if you're a student, can you get a few students together and can you work on a project together that's going to help you add something to your portfolio, something like that?
Yep. Definitely makes sense. Awesome. So now we have some questions related to coursework. So we will cover those, and then we'll hopefully have some time at the end to cover any questions we missed. So how do I transition from tech writing to UX writing?
Yeah, so what I say is that if you're a tech writer, you are in a great position to start because you are, number one, you have great writing experience. You have, you're already embedded in an organization, and you're at a great starting point. So you need to leverage that existing experience and that existing knowledge. I would say find opportunities where you're already working. Typically you would have a user experience design team. Try and find ways to get involved with them, even sort of, smaller opportunities on the side. I should say, as a plug, we do have a course coming soon that is specifically built for tech writers. So UX writing for technical writers. If you're looking at making that transition, it is designed specifically for tech writers who want to move into UX writing. And so we're really taking the knowledge you already have and sort of building on that. So yeah, if you're a tech writer, try and find existing opportunities where you already work. Talk to the design team, figure out ways you can really practice. Things like the daily UX writing challenge are a great way to get started.
Great. So which courses should you take if you're looking to transition from content marketing into UX writing?
Yeah, so what I'd say is that any course with a good foundation in design is a really great place to start. So you already, if you're working in content and marketing, you already have an understanding of how words and how language can really have an impact on experience. What I would then say is you need to pair that with an understanding of the design process. So look at, the design thinking process, really understand what does it mean to sort of empathize, research, ideate, prototype, test, think about that process and really understand it well, because it's very different from the type of, marketing process that you would be used to. Again, I would say that naturally, I would say the UX Writing Fundamentals course is a really great place to start, because it is built for people who do have some type of experience as well as no experience. So if you go in with content and a marketing background, it's really going to help you. We also have a course on microcopy that is a smaller, more introductory course that you can take in order to get started, to see if that's something that you'd be interested in. But I would say no matter what you choose, like from anywhere, really focus on something that that gives you a great foundation in design and design thinking.
Great. Do we offer scholarships?
We do offer scholarships. So scholarships are really important to us. So, we really think that it's a great opportunity for us to give back to the industry. And so it's really important to recognize, minority students who are traditionally underrepresented in technology. And we also do grant scholarships to people who may be struggling financially. Obviously, the past year has been really hard on a lot of people. And so we want to be in a position to help people. And so we want to be able to help people out. One thing I would say is that if you are looking to apply for a scholarship, one thing we think about is, how have you shown a passion or an interest in UX writing already? So, what have you done already to show that this is an area that you would really love to work in, and to what have you done already? You don't have to have like a huge portfolio or anything like that, but it's even just like, what have you started doing that will give you, that will let us know that you're really interested. So I've actually just dropped the link in the chat now, to the scholarship form. And so if you are interested in applying for a scholarship, please fill that out, and we'll get back to you once we've made a decision. But yeah, this is a really important aspect of our business. So yes, scholarships incredibly important to us.
Good stuff. And if anyone has any questions, you can email info@UX Writers Collective, and we can cover those there.
Absolutely.
So when thinking about new and emerging UX areas like VR, AI, can we talk a little bit about what that might look like? And then we also had a good question in the chat that I want to bubble up on this topic. So will writer roles be fewer when we start to think about like AI and GPT-3? Or will the role of writers change to lead and support how GPT is used? So just thinking about how the writer will play a role with this technology.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm really excited about, new fields like VR and AR. So augmented reality, I think, is going to be a really big area for UX writers and content strategists. Apple is working on some pretty cool stuff. It's kind of like an open secret at this point that they're going to be putting something out in the next few years. And obviously, where Apple goes, the rest of the industry follows. So, just keeping an eye on this area is really important. Just personally, I'm really excited, because I think that as that technology becomes more commonplace, there's going to be really cool opportunities to create all types of technology. So what I would say is that there aren't a lot of roles in that right now, because it's really just not a wide popular area yet. There are so few people working on those areas in design anyway, less so with UX writing and content strategy. That being said, one of the people on our team, Carly Gray, is hosting a webinar very soon about writing for AR. So keep an eye out for that, because that is going to be amazing. And yeah, I'm really excited about that. I will be attending, because I'm fascinated to hear what she has to say. So that's yeah, look out for that, because we're hosting something on that very soon. When it comes to the question of will writing roles be fewer because of technology like this, I don't think so, but here's what I'd say. Earlier in the webinar, I talked about really having a mindset of demonstrating impact and really thinking bigger and not just thinking about the words. What I think technology like GPT-3 will do is put less of an emphasis on the exact words that you're writing and more about the process. So you need to be thinking about flows from a broader perspective. You need to be thinking about content strategy. You need to be thinking about, okay, how are we making a bigger impact without above and beyond here's the error messages. So if you want to make sure that you're sort of future-proofing your role, really think about how you're doing the type of work that AI can't do.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we could have a whole other webinar about that, but that's a good way to start it off.
Yeah, and stay tuned again for that webinar with Carly. We'll make sure everyone gets those details. Awesome. So we kind of flew through all of those questions, and then there were a couple that I wanted to follow up on from the chat. And then as we're going through those, if you have any more, we have about 7-ish minutes to answer any more questions. So just a quick question on portfolio. So for someone who might not feel comfortable working in building a website, would a Google Slides or a PDF or any other sort of format be acceptable? Or do you think the way to go is with like a Squarespace or a Wix or another type of format?
Google Slides is fine. It's really, again, the focus really comes down to like, how are you demonstrating your work and you're giving it detail. Yeah, Google Slides is fine, and you can embed that in a website. That being said, if you're going for a UX writing role, like a portfolio is a good opportunity to show off the types of skills you have. So if you want to show that you're a great content designer, I would work on a Squarespace website just to show that you can do it. It doesn't need to be complex or really fancy or anything. It just can show that, again, it goes back to that idea of resourcefulness. Are you able to work with components? Are you able to work within a web framework? Yeah, I would really just think about that. But look, if you do a Google Slides portfolio, it's really not going to disadvantage you.
Cool. And then I see there are a few questions in the Q&A. For some reason, I can't open that. It's so weird. So if you want to move those over to the chat, if we haven't answered those yet, that would be great. And then one more question before we get to the questions coming in. So there was a question about age in the industry. And so thinking about, are UX writers of all ages? Is it common to see, people 50 plus working in the industry? Like, what do we see when it comes to age in this role?
Yeah. I know quite a few UX writers who are working in the industry age over 50. So I think it's kind of like any industry, right? There are going to be people who are around all ages. Yeah, I guess it's been my experience that I've known quite a few people who are aged over 40 and 50 years old in the industry. So I would say don't let that discourage you. It really comes down to the quality of your work. So yeah, absolutely. Don't let that be a barrier to you.
Awesome. And then Patrick, if you want to just quickly try to explain the difference between content strategy, UX writing, is it one and the same? And kind of how that fits in with content design and how we relate those three things.
Yeah. So what I would say is that content strategy is an umbrella term that refers to the entire way that an organization looks at, measures, implements content. And that could be both in a product, but also outside of product in editorial. Under that, what I would say is you have content design and UX writing. So content design is really the what. So how are you using components and structuring content? How are you showing content to a user in the way they want it? So how are you laying out components? How are you creating flows? And then UX writing is the actual practice of writing the words within that design. Now, as a UX writer, you need to have content design and content strategy skills. You may be called a UX writer, but I would tend to think of those three different areas as areas of responsibility. And in your role, you will be thinking and using those responsibilities in varying degrees, much in the same way that, you might dial up your, uh, think of it like a mixing desk. You have different dials. One day you might be doing UX writing a lot more because you're writing for components. One day you might be sketching, so that's more content design. The next day you might be thinking about results and looking at data, so that's more content strategy. So those are the three different differences, I think, and how you use them will vary based on your role.
Great. And then we had a question on, convincing leadership and getting buy-in. So what's the best way to convince execs to invest in and pay for UX writing skills for their design team? So designers who want to level up on UX writing.
Executives think in terms of design and solving problems. So if you are an executive, you are in control of a budget, and there will be a million reasons not to spend money on something. You need to be able to tie this training back to a problem you have internally and how it will be able to save them time/money. Mm-hmm. So if you're having a bunch of user errors because users are confused about UX writing or about the messages in your design, you need to be able to demonstrate that if you conduct this training, you need to be able to see a return on reduced number of errors, for instance. So I would really phrase it in terms of that. What type of return are you going to give the company based on the training you do? And there are a number of different ways to show that. So again, reduced errors, even reduced time in design. So if your team is more adept at UX writing, it can save them time in terms of turning out designs, and it can save time in terms of the design process, which again increases output, which overall saves or makes money. So I would try and phrase things in that way.
Great. Awesome. Patrick, I know we covered this last time, but maybe you could just give a quick overview of how can you share work that's under NDA? So any work that you can't necessarily show what you're working on, how do you describe that experience?
Yeah, so this can be a little bit difficult. If you are under NDA, it's obviously hard. So what I'd say is, number one, I would go to the hiring manager at the place where where you conducted the work, and frankly, just ask them permission if you can show it. Typically, anything that is confidential information, you are not going to be able to show. So try and keep that under wraps as much as possible. And then but anything public facing is really sort of fair game. So anything that is out in the open, feel free to use. I would use that as a guide.
Great. So we're basically at time. I just want to make sure. I see questions about chatbots and best practices there. We will actually have a webinar coming up in March with our course author, Hillary Black. So we'll definitely cover chatbot related content then. And then we will also have a webinar coming up with our UX Writing for Technical Writers course author, Dave Connis. So he can answer any questions as it relates to technical writing, UX writing, becoming a hybrid writer. And then again, we do have Carly who will host a session in March as well. So a lot of content coming up where you can get more time getting your questions answered. So I think that's all we have for now. And again, thank you everyone for your questions, for tuning in. We will be sure to send an email recap. And then if you have any further questions, feel free to email us info@uxwriterscollective.com. And then obviously just wanted to quickly plug, let me go back. If you're interested in taking the UX Writing Fundamentals course, we do have 20% off right now. Just wanted to quickly plug that. And if you don't already, please follow us on social media. I would love to chat with all of you. I just refresh the Twitter all the time. So tweet us,